Parents tricked me into signing $52,000 loan amount. My wife found out and they're facing legal charges. My parents, dad, 67 male, and mom, 61 female, invited me, 36 male, and my wife, 34 female, over for dinner. We went there thinking it to be the most normal thing. The conversation was usual, mom talking about her friends at the country club and dad about his golfing. Ever since we got married, mom has been asking my wife to join the club because that's where the elite class hangs out. My wife isn't that kind of woman who likes to lounge on their husband's money. She has a thriving career and she's better off without those shallow club groups. We expected a normal evening, but things took a turn when dad cleared his throat dramatically, the way he always does before dropping a bombshell. He informed us that they made a bad investment and were short about $5,000 to cover the loss. The amount was not huge, so I didn't make a big deal about it. My wife still asked about the details and mom quickly jumped in explaining that someone tricked dad into investing in a quick money scheme and it happened to be a scam. My wife asked if they'd invested just $5,000 or was it more. Dad fumbled for an answer, but mom clarified it. She said they pulled out the money from their retirement fund for the investment. When they incurred a loss, they saved up money from their household expenses to put it back into the fund, but they were short $5,000. Without thinking twice, I said, "Sure, I can help." I wasn't carrying my checkbook, so I asked if I can make online payments. Dad is old school. He said he'll collect it from me when he gets time. The rest of the evening went normally after that. The next day, Dad showed up at my house. I pulled out my checkbook, filled in the date and asked, "$5,000 is it?" Before putting in the amount, he took the check from my hand and said, "Actually, it's $5,000 and some change," scratching his head like he was doing advanced calculus. "Why don't you leave the amount blank and I'll fill it in later?" After looking up the exact figure, it is $52,100 something. I hesitated, but he hit me with the classic line, "Don't you trust me?" And like a sucker I am, I said fine, thinking it will be a matter of a few bucks here and there. Dad then whipped out a handwritten agreement saying, "Sign this." I asked, "What's this?" And he said it was just to make it official. He slid it across the table. I chuckled, saying that it's just a matter of $5,000. We're family. We don't need to have it on paper. He smiled and said, "I want to have it for record keeping and taxation." I said, "Sure," and took the paper saying I'll sign it later and ship it over to them. He wanted me to sign it right away and get it over with. Something in me snapped and I said, "I'll do it later." Dad's face froze for a second before he recovered with a tight smile. He didn't protest further. I took the papers and tossed them in my drawer with an intention of signing them later. Honestly, I had no intention of reading it word by word. Who does that for $5,000? Thankfully, my wife did. 2 days later, Dad called me asking about the agreement. I said, "Sure, I'll sign and ship it by tomorrow." I almost forgot about it. I didn't even mention this to my wife. When I pulled it out to sign, she asked me about it. I casually told her about it. She smelled a rat and asked me for the papers. There were a few instances in the past where she hinted at something suspicious about my parents, but I never paid a heed. I dismissed her as nosy. When she asked me for the papers, I sighed at her saying, "They're my parents and I can trust them with this." She still insisted. Normally, I would have signed it, but since this incident involved a blank check, I stopped to double-check. I sat down to review the agreement with her. 2 seconds into it and she pointed out the amount. It was $52,500. I stared at it stunned. To ease up the tension, she said, "It must be a mistake." He added an extra zero maybe. "Did you write a check for $5,000 or 52.50? My throat got dry. I almost choked up while telling her that I wrote the blank check to my dad. She obviously freaked out. I was also having cold sweats. $52,000 is a huge amount. Not that it would break my bank account, but it's still a huge money to waste. She lost it, telling me how stupid I was and how could I do this. She asked me how I didn't notice $52,000 leaving my account. Then I realized I had put the date on the check for the end of the week. I have this habit of writing the check dated with Friday. It was Wednesday and the date on the check was Friday, so I still had a day's time. I immediately called up the bank and froze all the debit requests through the check. I couldn't thank my wife enough for being nosy. It was such a close save. Though I have frozen the transaction and my money's safe, I cannot wrap my head that my parents tried to scam me. My problem is graver than it sounds. Let me clarify. My parents are well off. They aren't the kind of people who should be in financial trouble. My grandfather was a rich man and great-grandmother even richer. He was a diamond merchant and left ample wealth which was passed on to the next generations. Sadly, that wealth got wiped out in our generation, but it was still enough to last until my parents' retirement. Our family name still opens doors in certain circles, even if my parents seem hell-bent on slamming those doors shut with their terrible decisions. Now when I retrospect, it feels odd that my parents asked for $5,000. It wouldn't have created a dent in their savings. Why would they ask for such a small amount of money? It has to be $50K, and the extra zero in the agreement was surely not a mistake. I'm worried that there's in some sort of financial trouble. Should I even intervene or let them deal with it? My wife is apprehensive that if we ask them about their problems, they might open up and ask us to bail them out, which we don't want. Edit. My wife is usually not nosy, but over the last few years, she noticed a weird pattern about my parents which I royally ignored. Whenever we went out for dinner, my parents found a way to dodge the bill. My wife was suspicious because they boasted of leading a lavish life, but with us, they expected us to pay for their meal. It's not that we couldn't afford it. It was more about the gesture. I always brushed off for concern thinking they're my parents and it doesn't hurt to pay for their meals. My wife also used to point out that my mom never got her gifts on birthdays and anniversaries, but expected us to gift her. Also, Mom used to boast about gifting expensive items to her club friends, so why can't she spare a few grand in daughter-in-law? Again, I used to dismiss it, thinking it to be a catfight. A small loan of $50,000? Small? And then the charming move of pulling out a handwritten agreement. I'm sure that was just, make it official. Thank goodness for your wife. Your parents definitely tried to pull a fast one. She saved you from being overly generous with your money. Update 1. Thanks for engaging on my post. After writing it here, I realized it was better I confront them instead of assuming things. Let me tell you, I'm not a confrontational person. It freaks me out. So I called my brother to check if he had any hints about all of this. I vented out. He laughed on hearing me, but not in a fun way. He informed me that a month ago my parents pulled the same thing on him. They asked for a blank check, but he wrote in the $5,000 before handing it over. Ever since then, my parents have been acting weird to him, giving him the cold shoulder, and calling him stingy. He asked them what's wrong but didn't get any proper reason. After hearing my incident, their behavior made sense to my brother. They were angry that my brother didn't fall into their trap, and now it was clear that the extra zero wasn't a mistake but a deliberate attempt to trap me. My brother is very different from me. He's a no-nonsense person. He's snappy and doesn't take BS. Dad asked him to sign an agreement, but he outrightly refused to get into any legal stuff. He was like, "Do you need the money or not? If yes, here's the $5,000 check. If not, then fine." They took it but didn't seem happy about it. Brother thought they were just upset because they had to borrow. We were both reeling what was going on. Our parents had never asked for money before, let alone pulled something this shady. My parents have never been in this sort of situation before. Like I said, money was never a problem in our family. My brother and I went to private school. Dad funded our college education. We lived in a good house with all the amenities. My parents drove a good car. My brother and I decided to confront them and find out. Friday morning, I got a panic call from Dad asking why the check didn't go through. I asked him to come over in the evening. Initially, he resisted asking me what's the matter and we could discuss it over the phone. He said it's okay if the check didn't go through. He'll manage. I said it wasn't about the check or money. I had something else to talk about. I was genuinely worried if he was in trouble. I asked my brother also to be present so that we could confront him together. When Dad arrived, he tried to play it cool, but I could see the sweat on his forehead. He was surprised to find my brother. I asked him what's the matter and he blurted out, "It was just a mistake. An extra zero was added. No big deal." I asked him when did he realize about this mistake and if he did, why didn't he stop me from signing the paper? He had no answer except to repeat that it was a silly mistake. My brother asserted, "Cut the crap and tell us what's going on. We know it wasn't a mistake." Dad got silent and said he's in a financial trouble. He made some bad investment which emptied his bank and now the lenders are chasing him for the money. My brother and I were shocked to know because seeing my parents and their lifestyle, one could never guess they're struggling. We bombarded him with questions about how he came to this. Dad's side then launched into a story that made my jaw drop. He admitted they'd blown through the family inheritance and were now drowning in debt. For years, they've been living a luxury lifestyle they couldn't afford. They have been a member of a premium country club off their budget. They often take vacations in exotic locations and cruises. Mom doesn't leave the house without designer clothes and accessories, all to keep up appearances. It all started after we moved out and they got rid of their responsibilities. Dad retired early from the business as he wanted to pursue his baseball coaching career. However, they got so busy and charmed by the lavish lifestyle that he kicked aside his passion. The retirement money he saved was gone long back, and it was years they gulped the inherited wealth and the fine dining and premium wines. My brother and I were freaking out on hearing this. I asked him how they'd been managing to keep the lifestyle when the money was gone long ago. That's the kicker. They'd been running a mini Ponzi scheme at their country club. They convinced the members to invest in can't-miss opportunities, which guarantees quick money and overnight wealth. For the first 2 to 3 instances, they would generate good returns to the investor. And when they put in large sums, My parents would scam them saying they incurred a loss in this instance. Yes, it damaged their reputation, but they didn't care. They were rose-tinted glasses, and no one spoke evil in front of their face because they put this ultra-rich get-up. And people knew about our wealthy background, so they believed their facade. We asked him, if you were in so much trouble, why didn't you quit this lifestyle? He lowered his gaze and said Mom wasn't ready to give up. The option for him was divorce or scam, and he chose the latter. We both knew that he was trying to pin all the blame on Mom, but in reality, he was equally wrong. My brother and I made it clear that we're out of this and they shouldn't contact us again. Dad was in tears pleading with us to bail him out one last time. He was in hot soup. We were guessing that his fraud scheme didn't last long. The club members were suing them for fraud. However, that wasn't the case. That had made them sign an exclusive and robust agreement that safeguarded my parents. The problem was their friends gave them cold shoulders, and soon the affected people ganged up against them and socially boycotted them. To save their reputation, they arrogantly promised to return the money. Despite being broke, they had the audacity to be egotistic. My brother and I suggested he suck it up and quit the club, since they're not legally bound to return the money. They forget everything and start a new life with their means. I even offered to give him a coaching job at a local school. Dad was still sulking. Why? Because that was not it. Even after earning a bad reputation, they didn't give up. For the last few months, they started stealing luxury items from the club lockers. When their friends went swimming or to other sports activities, leaving their belongings unattended, my parents, especially Mom, stole those items and Dad sold them on the black market. However, that also didn't last long. Security cameras caught them red-handed. In order to save their club reputation, the chairman gave them a month to return the stolen items or face theft charges. My parents negotiated with them that they would return only those items which were captured on camera. It was funny that my parents turned the table around club security and threatened to expose that security lapse. The club authorities bit their tongue and agreed. Their reputation was supreme. If the word came out that their security camera wasn't functional, people would stop coming there. It left us wondering what a con artist my parents are. Dad went back to the shop where he had sold the stolen items. He had requested the owner not to resell them and that he would be coming back to get them. Dad pleaded with us to help him out. He swiftly shifted the blame on Mom, saying, "Your mother made me do this. She was ready to sacrifice the marriage for the sake of luxury. If I didn't do all this, she would have left me. I love her. How could I let her go?" I shot back. "Oh, so now everything is Mom's fault. You tried to trick me into signing a $52,000 loan. You were the one who decided to retire at 50. I mean, who does that? People work until their 70s and even 80s. If you really wanted to provide a better life for Mom, you could have just worked hard instead of scanning." My brother chimed in sarcastically. "Let me guess. Was it Mom's idea to steal from the club too?" Dad stammered, running out of excuses. We told him we're out of this. A few hours later, Mom stormed into my house, screaming and calling names. She was furious that we insulted Dad and didn't fulfill his demands. She was like, "We don't have any hope from that craphead, idiot, my brother, but you? How could you turn your back on us? We raised you with the best of amenities, and when we needed your help, you turned us down." I shot back. "You didn't ask for help. You want me to save you guys from legal charges. You committed fraud to fund your lavish lifestyle, for your own interest and not for us, so don't guilt-trip me into this." She sobbed, whining. "We did so much for our children and this is what we get in return. Our children abandon us in times of need." She sang praises about the sacrifices of Dad's hard work in raising us. I ask her if she knows that Dad has put the blame on her, that she was the one who forced him into fraud. Surprisingly, she wasn't shocked. Instead, she sobbed harder in saying, "Your dad loves me. He is a family man. He'll go any lengths to provide for the family. Sadly, his children don't pick up the trait from him." I replied, gladly, "We didn't. We don't want to beg in front of our children to save us from fraud charges." Despite knowing that Dad blamed her for everything, she was unmoved, which means they both were putting up an act. My wife was patiently listening to all the BS until she had enough. She said, "You should be grateful that we don't report you for the forged agreement. You tried to trick us into a scam and you've got guts to stand here and guilt-trip us." It wasn't pleasant, but I don't think she said anything wrong. My mom stood up and screamed, "You want to see your parents going to jail? Is that what you want? Remember, you turned your back on us, so don't come whining while we leave nothing in the inheritance." My wife sighed. "Use it to save your butt." Mom raced out swearing to never see my face and disowning me and my brother. I know I did the right thing, but it still hurts to imagine your parents going to jail at this age. Update 2. Sorry I took a while to update. Actually, I didn't want to update. Who wants to tell the world that their parents are frauds? My parents were charged with theft. They weren't able to arrange the money to buy back the stolen items which they had sold. Hence, The club authorities reported them. Yes, the event leading to the final day was stressful. My parents tried every means to get away with the charges, but they had burnt all their bridges. They had no one to turn to. They duped their friends, borrowed money from relatives, never to return, and tried to deceive me and my brother. Who's gonna help such people? Though the country club pressed charges only for theft, Dad's Ponzi scheme came to light during the probe. Mom tried to play the victim, claiming she had no idea that Dad was into all of these. She even denied all the allegations of theft despite her face clearly visible on the camera while whisking out jewelry from their friends' bags. My parents had pawned dozens of luxury items from Rolex watches to diamond jewelry and spent the money on stupid expenses like spa treatments and golf weekends. During the trial, Dad tried to shift the blame onto anyone he could. He defended himself, crying, "I was under a lot of pressure. I just wanted to provide for my family." Prosecutor shot back, "By stealing and lying?" My parents came up with all sorts of lame excuses for their fraud, and ultimately both were convicted. Dad got a heavier sentence for his role in theft and fraud, while Mom got off with probation. Due to their advanced age, they were given the option to pay all the money they'd extorted through fraud and theft, along with a hefty fine if they wanted to get away with jail time. The only way out for them was to sell the house and their cars to cover the debts. They sold everything they had, yet it wasn't sufficient. They were assigned community service as a trade-off. They are now living in a shelter and surviving on pension. We last saw them on the final day of the court hearing. They looked beyond recognizable. Felt like they aged 10 years in just a few months. This is what poverty does to people. Dad looked away and refused to talk to us. Mom cursed us, saying it was better if they killed us as infants or instead never brought us into the world. They expected us to bail them out, cleaning up their messes they created. Had they incurred those debts for raising us, it would have made sense for us to take the responsibility, but they indebted themselves for their lavish lifestyle, which was so unnecessary. It's been a month since then. My brother and I are still processing the whole mess. It's hard to imagine that the parents we grew up idolizing turned into criminals, but what can we do about it? Better if you had never been born? Oof, that's a bit dark. It's tough because at the end of the day, they're still your parents, but you can't ignore what they did, and you definitely shouldn't be expected to clean up the mess they made. You and your brother did the right thing by walking away and setting those boundaries, but that doesn't make it easy. Wishing you all the best. OP. What would you have done? Have you ever been scammed like this from your parents or a family member?